Hello, my name's Emma. I'm the founder of Mighty Writer. I was an assistant head teacher and a Senko. The last school I worked in was a large primary, so we went through from nursery to year 7. And I taught across the school, but when I was working particularly in years 1 and 2, I just thought there must be an easier way to teach writing because there's so much for teachers to teach and there's so much for children to remember. So the idea behind Mighty Writer is that you have got absolutely everything you need in one place to teach children to be writers. So going through right from their earliest experiences of literacy, developing vocabulary, their ability to retell, use their imagination, develop that vocabulary, right through to writing confidently in a range of genres. So Mighty Writer is designed to be used by children in nursery, and then in reception, year 1 and year 2, as a whole class resource, and then with groups of children, pairs, individual children, as much as possible. It's then designed to be used as an intervention tool in Key Stage 2 for those groups of children who still need consolidation on some of those Key Stage 1 objectives, whether that's sentence structure, punctuation, writing in different genres. So whatever you already use in your school to teach writing, Mighty Writer can complement them and it can fit in alongside whatever you already do. You don't have to change your practice. Equally, it is a standalone resource. So if you didn't use anything else to teach your children to be writers, Mighty Writer will cover all your national curriculum objectives. You can cover all your writing and a lot of your speaking and listening just using Mighty Writer. So today I'm going to show you what is the actual Mighty Writer board, how it's set up, and then how you build up the use of it over time in order to make your children completely confident and independent writers. So Mighty Writer is a large mat which can either be hung on the wall or it can go on the floor. It's very robust, it's got a non-slip back, so you can actually sit a class or group of children around this so they can be really hands-on, lying across it, really getting stuck in. So there's no right or wrong, it depends the space you've got, who you're working with and what suits you. You just have that flexibility. Now around the edge there are these toolbars which are velcroed on, so they can all come on and off. Down this side you have a selection of sentence starters and at the bottom you've got some smaller conjunctions. So Mighty Writer is designed for fiction and non-fictional writing, so you can model any genre you want to. If you had every child by the end of year 2 using all this vocabulary confidently and independently in their writing, then obviously they would have made very good progress. But this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a snapshot. And obviously we don't want to limit children. So there are also blanks. And all the blanks can be written on with a normal whiteboard pen and you can just rub it off when you're ready. So if a child said, I would like to start my sentence with the word excitedly, for example, then either you or they can write that on the sentence starter and it can just go in front of the relevant sentence. Or you might say, this week we're focusing on this particular objective, so we're not using any of these sentence starters. We're only going to use a list of ones that we have generated as a class. Or you might say, we're in the summer term of year 2, I really want to move my children forward, so this week we're only looking at fronted adverbials. So you've just got that flexibility and you can really push forward your more able children. Along the top, there are 2 toolbars. Each one has got 44 images. Now these are designed to be very generic, so each picture can represent lots of different things in lots of different stories. So it encourages children to use their imagination, think outside the box, connect ideas together. And again, this is for fiction and non-fictional writing. So for example, the sand could be a sandpit at the play park, it could be the beach, it could be the desert. Here, where we've got a story, the main character is a mermaid. Now it's likely I will need that mermaid again, maybe several more times, in which case there are also blanks for the images. So I might say to the children, right, we need the mermaid again, I am just going to draw a fish's tail, and that represents the mermaid. So it's a very quick, simple symbol for me to draw, but it makes children very quick at associating a symbol with a word when they are retelling. And when they come to plan their own sentences and stories, maybe using pictures to do that, they tend to copy you. So their whole focus becomes what is the quickest thing I can draw to help me remember what my sentence says. Down the side, you've got a selection of all the punctuation you need. You've got speech bubbles, so when you come to introduce speech into writing, you can put this above the sentence which contains the speech. So if you are in the habit of retelling stories out loud, maybe you use actions to help children recall that story in order, you can put this above the sentence. You can even draw on the speech marks. So when children get to that sentence, they can physically make that symbol in the air, they can hear where that speech starts and where it ends. And when you come to focus on including direct speech in writing as a specific objective, you can be really focused. So you might say to the children, this character is starting to speak halfway through the sentence. So before we open the speech marks, we need to place a comma here. Or before we close the speech marks, because they said it like this, we need to use an exclamation mark. So you're not having to change your practice. You are just using this to very explicitly model those particular objectives, those skills, until children have really got that understanding and are ready to move on. There are then 3 symbols which children very quickly understand and are able to use because of their shape. And as I introduce them to you, this is how you can introduce them to the children. So this star makes our writing even better. So this is an adjective. This swirl is spinning, it's moving, it's doing something. So this is a verb. And this shape is changing shape. So it's changing the verb or changing the sentence. So this is an adverb. And because children really do very quickly understand what they are, I actually say to teachers, introduce all 3 of these in reception. Because even if not all children are able to put this type of vocabulary into a written sentence by the end of their time in early years, they can use and understand it in a spoken sentence. And they've learnt it without it ever becoming a worry. So it is a fantastic foundation for them as they move into Key Stage 1. Then there are faces which just have the eyes. So if you are thinking about how a character is feeling, you're recalling a particular emotion, then all you need to do is draw on the mouth or rosy cheeks, whatever it is that helps children remember a specific word and recall that story. There are then arrows. Now, in the first instance, these are used to connect the images together so that children get the idea of following a sequence in order, so they know that it makes sense, so they know it will always say the same thing. And then they are used to show the structure of whatever genre you are working on, whether that's a letter, a recount, etc. Alongside the arrows, you then have blanks. So you have got blanks for everything around the edge. So you never need to worry that you're going to run out of anything. Then we have the sentences. So each one of these represents one sentence. At a basic level, green is the beginning and build up, orange is the middle, and red is the end. But as children progress, you're looking at different genres, they're becoming more competent writers, you can use these for different purposes. So for example, I might say to the children, just because this is the first sentence doesn't mean to say it's always going to start with once or first. We might want to draw the reader straight in. So on this occasion, the first sentence is beginning with the word unfortunately. Or you might say, this week we're doing non-chronological reports, so the colours are going to represent different paragraphs in our writing. Each colour comes in 2 different lengths, because obviously by the time children are in year 2, they need to be writing in sentences of different lengths. They need to understand how that can be used to create different effects. So you can model that really clearly. So I might be, for example, be working with my whole class planning the beginning of a story. So I might just be using the greens, and I might say to the children, right, we've had a couple of longer sentences. Let's now introduce a shorter sentence, because we want to add a bit of drama, or we want to make the reader stop and think. So the children can really clearly see the difference between the 2 and start to apply that in their own planning and their own writing. So that is everything around the edge. And this space in the middle where I have a story at the moment is your blank space, where you can model different types of writing, where you can look at different elements of grammar, where children can interact with it, edit it, move things around, and basically learn to become a writer. So every time you as the teacher use Mighty Writer, you are modelling, and every interaction the children have is a step towards becoming a writer. They can't actually do anything wrong. So they never associate talking and writing with something that they are going to find difficult or with something that other children can do and they can't. They are literally immersed in language from what they do, what they see, and how they interact with each other. So when you first introduce Mighty Writer, even with my very youngest children, I will just show them the whole thing in the first instance, because right from the start, I am setting that expectation that this is what being a writer is all about. And we're believing that all our children are going to be fantastic writers. But I just introduce it in a very gentle way. So I might say, right, this is Mighty Writer. This is going to help us have a wonderful imagination. This is going to make us really good talkers and fantastic writers. And then what I do is I take off everything I don't need and I just gradually build up the use of it over time. So initially, I would totally remove the sentence starter toolbar. I would totally remove the punctuation and symbol toolbar and the toolbar at the bottom. So I am just left with these pictures. Now, depending on who I'm working with, I might think, actually, that's too many pictures. It's going to be quite overwhelming. So I've got the option of removing one of those toolbars, and then I can just build up the number of pictures as the children get more confident. If you have got this hanging on the wall and you're working with a group of children and you want them to interact with it, you've also got the option of moving these pictures halfway down so that the children can easily come and reach them and the space they're working in is smaller and not so overwhelming. So what you are doing with Mighty Writer right from the start is giving children ownership of their ideas. You are teaching them how to use their imagination, how to access their imagination, how to connect ideas together, how to hold them in their head in order to be able to speak in sentences. So you're not having to change your practice, you are just doing all your normal discussion, questioning to really encourage that interaction. So if you imagine this is just a blank space, I've got my pictures, I might just start off by saying to the children things like, can you find a picture of something that you like? Can you find a picture of something that you did at the weekend? Can you describe the whale to me? So obviously children are coming into school at varying levels. Some children are already quite eloquent, they've got a rich vocabulary, lots of experiences to draw on, and they find it very easy to engage. Other children are at the opposite end of the scale. They're not speaking in sentences. Some children might be non-verbal. They find it very difficult to communicate. They haven't got lots of experiences to draw on and they find it very hard to engage. But even those children will be successful. So I might say, can you just choose 3 pictures that you like and can you just put them on the mat? And they can put them anywhere they like. So they might choose the boy, they might choose the trees, they might choose the dinosaur. And then what I do is I say, wow, you have just thought of a really good sentence. Let me tell you what it says. Once upon a time, there was a little boy who went for a walk in a wood where he met a friendly dinosaur. So straight away, that child who isn't speaking in sentences, doesn't have the vocabulary, is immediately feeling proud of themselves and viewing themselves as a writer because they thought of that sentence. It's just that I have said it out loud. And straight away, I have modelled quite sophisticated vocabulary. So I've used once upon a time. I've used an adjective to describe the dinosaur. I've modelled how to connect those pictures together. And then what I do is I do this as often as possible in as many different contexts as possible. So I might say, every morning when my children come into school, just for 2 or 3 minutes, as a class, we are going to make up a simple sentence or story using some of these pictures. At the end of the day, instead of reading my class a story, I might model being an author. So the children can watch me out loud, again, making up a simple sentence or story using some of these pictures. I then give children lots of opportunities to use this in small groups, independently, with me, talking about the pictures, discussing them, building that vocabulary, maybe starting to place them on the mat. Some children might be able to start to connect 2 or 3 or even more pictures together. For those children that cannot connect pictures together, it might be that they are just choosing one picture that they like, and I model making observations about it, modelling that vocabulary until they are ready to do it for themselves. So I can meet each child exactly where they are at when they come into my class, and I can spend as long as I need to on each stage until they are ready to move on. And then over time, we're gradually building this up. So over time, the children will start to be able to use more pictures. Right from the beginning, I am wanting to develop children's memory so that they can actively recall all their ideas. So I might introduce the idea of arrows so that children understand that if they follow that sequence, it makes sense and it will always say the same thing. And when they come to use the arrows for themselves, it doesn't matter where they have placed their pictures on the mat, they can show you how they have connected those pictures together by where they choose to position the arrows. I then start to build up in a very informal way just elements of a sentence, so picking out the particular things I want to make children aware of. So I might say to the children, actually, when we say this sentence, the very first word we can hear is the word once. This is the word once, so I'm just going to put that there so children can hear it, they can visualise it, and we're just starting to build a basic sight vocabulary in context and gradually starting to piece together elements of a sentence. So I might say, actually, when we described the dinosaur, we used an adjective. We said he was friendly. This is an adjective. So every time you see that star, it will remind you of the word friendly. So we're building children's visual memory and their ability to recall through pictures and symbols. Now, alongside this, particularly in early years, you can do all your normal opportunities for emergent writing and mark making. So I might have this on the floor, I might have a group of children talking about the pictures, starting to make up some simple sentences or stories. They might have a clipboard and a piece of paper, and they're motivated to want to write down their sentences and their ideas. So all the things you normally do in an early years environment. Sometimes, if I'm with the class or a group, I might say to the children, actually, that was a fantastic sentence you just thought of. Could you say it out loud again? Because I would like to write it down. So I might have my whiteboard and pen, the children say that sentence out loud, and I model writing it. So well before children can do that for themselves, they are seeing the whole process through from beginning to end. From the gathering of ideas, the sequencing of ideas, the saying it out loud, the checking for sense, etc., to that final written sentence. So that process becomes very familiar to them over time in preparation for when they are ready to do it for themselves. And as and when I feel children are ready, i.e. they are confident generating their own ideas, they are able to sequence them, hold them in their head, they are confidently speaking in sentences, and I want children to start planning in a more structured way, then I can introduce the actual sentences. So as I said, each one of these is one sentence. This is where the sentence starter goes, and this is where the punctuation goes. And like I also said, it's really important that children can't go wrong when they are using this. So at no point do they feel anxious about what they are about to do. Anything they do is always a positive step towards becoming a writer. So if they place this first sentence in the bottom right-hand corner, it doesn't matter because they read from left to right and they'll be following the direction of the arrows. So it will always make sense. And just like when I just had the pictures, I just did all my normal questioning, I'm doing exactly the same when I come to introduce the sentences. So for example, I could be working in year 1, we've done an autumn walk in the playground, and we are now planning a recount of that on here as a class. I might be in year 2, my topic's the seaside, and we are planning an adventure story in that setting in preparation for children doing their own. So as I normally do on a day-to-day basis, the questions I'm asking are particular to the objectives I'm focusing on and what I want children to start being aware of and using in their writing. So I might say things such as, how might our very first sentence start? Who's the main character? What's the setting? What punctuation might we need at the end of this first sentence? And we gather those ideas together and we start to represent them on here. So it could look like this. So once there was a mermaid who lived in the sea, full stop. So straight away, we've got our sentence starter, our main character, our setting, and our punctuation. And we can go back, we can say that out loud, we can talk about whether it makes sense. And in the beginning, you will just be doing lots of simple, standalone sentences, so that very quickly children get the idea of a sentence starter, a full stop for the end, and the content. And over time, you can start to make those sentences a little more complex because children have already been exposed to the adjectives, maybe verbs, maybe adverbs, and you can start to develop these sentences and build on them over time. Eventually, you might extend it. So you might say, we're going to have one beginning sentence being a green, we're going to have one middle sentence being an orange, and we're going to have one end sentence being a red. Because by doing that, children are getting the idea that those three sentences link together and build on one another. And where we've only got three sentences, it's likely that the middle sentence will be where something exciting is going to happen. So we can start to focus on sentence starters. So here we've got the words just then. But it might be that at the end of the day, again, I want to model being an author. So I might want to tell children a story using only three sentences in order to consolidate what we have done in literacy. And when I do that, I might choose to model vocabulary here that the children are not aware of or using for themselves. So I might use the word unexpectedly, in the hope that they will see it in context and therefore be able to use it for themselves at a later date. So I've got the advantage of always being able to be one step ahead of the children, modelling whatever it is I want them to start including in their writing. And as I'm building these sentences, as we're looking at different genres, we can then start to build up all the toolbars around the edge. So when I put these toolbars on, I don't display everything on them immediately because obviously that would be overwhelming. The children wouldn't know what to do with them. We build these toolbars up over time according to the objectives we're working on and the ability of the children we're teaching. So if I was starting to introduce sentence starters in the autumn term of reception, I might say on here, I am just going to have on display maybe 4 or 5 time connectives. Over here, I might start off with the full stops and maybe the stars for the adjectives. And again, we'll just build it up over time. What's important is that when you are working with your whole class for an input, that you have on display everything your most able children need access to in order to make progress within that input. And then when you come to work with small groups or even individual children, it's very easy to differentiate very quickly because you can just take off or add on anything you need for that particular group. Now, obviously, as I build up these toolbars around the edge, whatever I'm working on can become increasingly complex. So it could start to look more like this. So once upon a time, there was a beautiful mermaid who swam quickly in a choppy sea. Full stop. And again, we can go back, we can say that sentence out loud, we can talk about whether it makes sense. And as a group or a class, we have worked together thinking about the objectives we're focusing on, what we're wanting to include in our sentences, talking about whether it makes sense, what adverb could work well with the verb, etc. And it might be that over the week, we're wanting to build a story. So Monday, we might be using the greens for the beginning. Tuesday, we're going to do the middle. Wednesday, we're going to do the end. And every time we add a new sentence, we're going back to the beginning. Does it make sense? What could our next sentence starter be? Do we want to make any changes, etc.? I might be in year 2 and I might say, I've identified that I want the children in my class to start developing a much stronger beginning to a story. So I want there to be more development of character, more development of setting. So what I might do is in my inputs only be modelling a beginning. So we're just having the greens, but within that we're having sentences of different lengths, Every sentence is going to start with a different sentence starter. I want to see adverbs in there, whatever it is that you really want to focus on and model for children so that they have confidence using it in their own writing. And then what you are particularly doing with Mighty Writer is questioning the children so that they get very good at being able to picture and move sentences around in their head, all those skills they need in order to be confident authors. So I might say to the children, well, what happens if we swap the verb and the adverb round? Does that make any difference to how this sentence sounds? Could I use any other conjunction here? What about any other sentence starter? We then might have a focus on punctuation, and I might say, well, could I use any other type of punctuation here? So very quickly, children get the idea that generally speaking, at the end of a sentence, we use a full stop, but there are exceptions to that rule. We might be having a particular focus on adjectives. So I might say to the children, actually, when we described the mermaid, you thought of lots of adjectives, but we only included one in this sentence. Why don't we extend this sentence and include another one? So if we said the mermaid was beautiful and friendly, I can then explain to the children that if we have two adjectives, we can join them together with the word and, or we could separate them with a comma. So children get very good at being able to picture this in their head. So when they are coming to describe a noun, they can visualise those stars and they're thinking, how many adjectives do I need? How am I separating them? Is it a comma? Is it and? Is it a combination of both? And as more and more things get added into their writing, they eventually get very good at being able to move whole sentences around in their head in order to create specific effects. And then when you come on to things like subordinate clauses, for example, you can model that really clearly. So you might join several of these sentences together using commas. You can then physically model how to move parts of that sentence around in order to create different effects and meanings, etc. And whatever genre you are working with, you can very clearly model the layout and the content. So if I was in reception and we were thinking about firework poems, for example, we might just be in the autumn term. We haven't been looking at the actual sentence mats. So we're just at the stage where we're using pictures and arrows and maybe the stars for the adjectives. So we might design a firework poem and we're just going to do it in a swirl shape, where the arrows are connecting the pictures together. We're describing the fireworks, so we're using the adjectives, and children can recall that poem in that order by following those arrows. We might be doing instruction writing. So down here, we might just be having our time connectors or our bossy verbs. We might just be using the green sentences, and we're going to place them one underneath the other with the arrows pointing down so that children get very confident understanding that in instructions, we've got one on each line. And you can differentiate that further. So for your more able children, you might say every sentence has got to have a conjunction in it. So whatever genre you are working on, you can model very explicitly the layout, you can focus very clearly on the type of vocabulary you're using, and then your more able children, when they come to plan this for themselves, can go away and write as much as they want to. You don't have to model a tremendous amount of sentences, but what you are modelling is the content of each one, the layout, so that children can then have that confidence to go away and write very productively. As I said, particularly in early years, you will be doing all your normal opportunities for emergent writing and mark making using Mighty Writer to kickstart their imagination. But as and when you want children to start planning their ideas in a more constructed way, you can actually use these mini Mighty Writers. They're on the website and they're already differentiated for you. So they have differing numbers of sentence starters and conjunctions. They have differing numbers of sentence starters, punctuation and symbols. And the idea is that you print out whichever ones are appropriate and you enlarge them to A3 so that children can work in pairs, practicing and consolidating everything they have done with you on a practical level. So at no point does a child feel anxious that they suddenly have to think of things on their own. But they are always given the opportunity in those first 3 or 4 years of school to actually actually use and understand how to enjoy language, so they can talk together. What's our sentence starter going to be? What pictures do we need to draw to help us remember what our sentence says? What punctuation do we need at the end? Does it make sense? Do we want to make any changes? So all the things you do anyway, you are just using this as a tool. So on a weekly basis in my classroom, I might be using this daily for my inputs. I then might have children working together in pairs or groups, planning their own poem or their recount or their story, whatever it is you're working on. When I'm working with a group, I might say, for example, today I'm going to be with my more able children. We're going to be using the Mighty Writer mat. I'm going to have it on the floor. We're all sitting around it and we are looking at extended sentences, and we're having a particular focus on these conjunctions. So you can really identify what is it that that group or that individual child needs. You can focus on that so that they've then got the confidence to apply that independently. And if you have been having a week where you have been working together as a class, planning a piece of writing, so you might have done a story or a recount, you've been editing it, the children know it off by heart, they're really happy with it, and it's ready to be written down, then you can model writing from that plan so that children have the confidence to write from theirs. And this is something that they have seen you do right from the start when it was just very simple sentences. Now, when I model writing from that plan, I can be really creative in the way I do that. So I might say to the children, as you said that first sentence out loud, I heard somebody use such a fantastic adjective in place of this one. Why don't we use that instead? So that children understand that an author is always being reflective and wanting to improve their writing. And just because it's in a plan doesn't mean to say you can't change your mind. So that does give children a tremendous confidence and ownership with language. And the idea is that if children have used this for 3 or 4 years, that by the time they get to Key Stage 2, they don't actually need this anymore, because they have got such a strong picture in their head of how sentences are constructed, how different types of genres work, that anything they are then taught in Key Stage 2, they can just slot into place and continue to make very good progress. So everything you see here, you get with the Mighty Writer set. And this number of pictures, again, you can use it for fiction and non-fictional writing. You can do a tremendous amount of writing just with these and the blanks. But also alongside this, you can actually get colour-coded toolbars which are linked to topics that teachers generally cover in early years and Key Stage 1. So there's things like space, fantasy, around the world, journeys, mini beasts, seaside. There's some traditional tales, and they're colour-coded so that you can mix and match them if you want to. This one you get 2 of, and this is called Real Life. So this is basically all your non-fiction. So it's particularly good for early years, the start of Key Stage 1, where when children are first talking and writing, it's all about themselves and what is meaningful to them. If you would like to purchase Mighty Writer, there are 2 different options. You can either pay monthly or you can buy outright. For both options, the more sets you purchase, the greater the discount. For the pay monthly option, for every set you have, every year, you get 4 free additional toolbars. So if you would like to purchase Mighty Writer now, then please get in touch. If you have found this presentation useful and you would like to book a live interactive webinar with me for your colleagues at your school, then you can book on this page.